Well, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on the UK user group today. I appreciate it. I've been asked to present or talk about the future of Data Vault. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I see from the list of people on a lot of old friends, or should I just say friends that are old? That's a joke, folks. I don't mean anything by it. I'm old myself. I'm upwards of 50. 52 years of age. So anyhow, been around the block a few times. I'm glad that everyone is here. I hope that those of you who know me and have heard me speak get something new from today's presentation. And those of you that don't know me or haven't heard me before, I hope you get a lot of value out of this. All right, so whenever we talk about future, one of the things I need to do is step back and talk about where we were. It is difficult to predict the future or discuss the future or talk about where to go if we don't understand where we've been. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm only going to focus on 2020. In reality, I could focus on the last 30 years, but that would be too much. So when we look back at 2020, what happened in 2020, aside from COVID, of course, which changed the entire world. It changed the way we work. It changed what we do. It changed how we interact, how we collaborate. It should have changed the perspective as well as either changed or be changing the culture in your company. But one of the things that we see is that data continue to grow immediately. We're getting larger and larger data sets across the board. And we're seeing more real-time streaming coming in from the community and from different sources and from sensors. We're starting to see a huge uptake in sensor data around the world, as well as just a huge uptake in ingesting data that's out there. As COVID struck, we all had to move online, whether we wanted to or not. We increased our web presence, we increased our web traffic, we increased all the data about ourselves are out there on the web. That in itself is of interest to companies that want to move forward. So from that perspective, data's not only continue to grow, but it will exceed all expectations that we're aware of. Back in 2020, metadata, master data, and governance became a topic of conversation. I don't know how many of you remember that, but it's there. Unfortunately, not enough credence is given to those topics today. I expect that to change in the near future. Cloud platforms broke industry paradigms and continue to do so. Things like data sharing, things like separating compute from storage, things like being able to natively leverage JSON and XML formats in a performant manner. Things like incorporating security in the base platform without losing performance of the queries or the load processes. All of these things changed the way we do business, and they will continue to evolve and change. We're only getting faster and better at managing larger and larger data sets. Now, that's not to say that cloud platforms are the only thing that happened or that they should be focused on. We have the cusp of virtualization starting to happen again. And by the way, we've seen this before in the 90s, but the technology wasn't there to support it. In the 90s and 2000s, we called this EII, Enterprise Information Integration, for those of you that remember that label. But that's changed. But today we've got it virtualization, and the technology's finally there, especially if we look to the cloud for virtualization engines. But before you go off on virtualization tools, remember this: virtualization can mean many different things, from a view in the database to a tool that you use that actually caches data in the intermediate states. Security and privacy have taken center stage. There's absolutely no doubt, with the rise of all the data that we've been putting out there about ourselves, with additional lawsuits that have occurred, with mistakes that AI has made, security and privacy are here front and center. And if you're not paying attention to this as an industry individual, either practitioner or manager or executive, then you're looking at the wrong thing. you really need to pay attention to security and privacy. And it's not just PII data that I'm talking about, it's the entire data set. Who has access to what analytics, what aggregates, what data, what is competitive information, and how do we leverage it? At the bottom of this list, you see teams without automation were unable to compete effectively. This has been proven time and time again. I've run into a particular, well, I heard about this the other day from a good friend of mine. There is one team in a company in a division that has been working with Data Vault for a while, and they're doing great things. And then there's another division that's just starting their Data Vault journey, but they don't understand what it means to not only automate, but to leverage Data Vault and to see the successes that it brings to the table. You can't get there from here. With so much data to manage, with all of these things, we really have to get better at automating mundane tasks and focusing the human and the human work ethic on problem solving, things like ethics and morals and AI, and how do we address the business and the business life cycles. And of course, according to the Eckerson Group here in the States, it was the year of the Data Vault, although I don't know that you could say it was the year. Data Vault has been 20 years in the making since I released it in 2000 to the public space, and of course 10 years before that in the government space. So it's been around quite a while. Now, before I get into predictions, I need to talk a little bit about some ethical issues, concerns that you should be addressing, you should be thinking about, things in your future as a practitioner, as an implementer, as an architect or a designer, things that you should be trying to solve. And one of the first things that comes to mind is this nature of AI systems. And the whole thing about AI and deep learning, and I'm going to use AI as the governing umbrella term here, realizing, of course, there are some splits under the covers as to what that means. But I'm just going to say AI systems in general. And what they don't have is a moral or an ethical compass. So the routines that are built, the neural nets that are built, the models that are built, we don't even know how to scratch the surface with moral or ethical guidance in these routines. And here's a quote from Future of News, Work News. It comes from an article. The title of the article is there at the top. But in the healthcare industry, who's liable when AI makes a mistake? And here's an example that might hit home for you. Suppose you go into the doctor, you complain of heart pain, right? You complain of heart pain, the doctor does some diagnostics and puts you in intensive care, says we need to address this immediately, puts a bunch of monitors on your arms, sticks a needle in your blood, monitors your blood and all of that, and then stabilizes you. And then says, I'll be back in 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Now there's an AI algorithm running on the server in the hospital. The AI algorithm sees maybe your blood pressure spikes or whatever the case is, sees a problem, reaches into its data set, which, by the way, it probably sees a lot of dirty data out there because nobody took the time to clean it up. And then it makes a decision. It alerts the doctor and says, hey, doc, you need to administer 20 cc's of this kind of medication to this patient within the next 5 minutes. The doctor comes in with the medication, injects you with it, you start feeling better, and then you die. Now, there's a real problem there. Is it because the AI recommendation was wrong? Is it because the AI recommendation was right, but it was fed bad data about you? Or because the AI engine factored in data from other patients that are intensive care that should never have been applied to your condition? So there's moral, there's ethical concerns. What if the AI engine that makes the decision for the doctor about the medication that you need doesn't have access to enough information about you because you've locked down your privacy concerns and said, I'm not going to let the hospital or its servers see it? So there's a lot of issues to have and to discuss. And as practitioners, we need to be paying attention to bad data sets. I've said this before. In fact, I blogged on this in 2000, 2001, 2003, and 5, and 6, and 7 about the fact that there's gold in bad data. Well, you got to understand where the outliers are. You got to understand what is bad, how to classify what's bad in order to understand how bias is treated. So bad data can introduce incorrect bias to AI systems. But beyond that, there's also moral and ethical guidance. And there are cases about badly designed AI that create this, decision-making process that determines who gets healthcare and who doesn't, all because of race, color, creed, because that's the way the human bias was in the data or represented in the data over the years. And it has nothing to do with the AI. It's just the AI algorithm was left unchecked. The other thing here, what about somebody who's responsible? Where's the accountability when things do go wrong? This is something very, very important and near and dear to me. We talk about auditability in the data vault context. We talk constantly about being able to prove where the data came from, being able to prove the lineage, being able to see what calculations were applied and when, and version control and governance. Well, all of that is wonderful, but we don't have that in AI yet. So we have some interesting things that we really got to take advantage of that come with the data vault solution. But here, recently reported legal actions brought for damages due to wrong investments. What if you have a retirement fund, right? And you've trusted a company that has an AI engine to make the right investments. And you go to sleep, and then one night there is a company that excels and an AI engine is at work and it puts all of your money into this company. The next day, this company is hit with fraud allegations. It becomes a shell company. It's exposed for investing in deforestation practices or destruction of the planet or pollution beyond acceptable levels. And the company falls flat and you lose your retirement. Now, when you lose your retirement, who are you going to hold accountable? How are you going to get your retirement back? Is it even possible? Right? So this is the question. Now, if you blame the company, if you go after the company, well, that's one thing, but then the company's going to say, hey, look, it was the AI's algorithm fault, and we don't have any visibility or even understand how the AI algorithm made its choice. And this is where we are today. So why am I harping on this? Well, because I believe that every one of us in the practitioner industry of IT and business going forward has to address data science at one level or another. We need to get better with how we deal with data. We need to get better with how we classify it, how we understand it, how we mitigate some of these problems. We have 30 plus years or 50 plus years of IT experience around data, data management, and everything else. We should be leveraging that in collaboration with the data scientists and the data science groups. There are still quite a number of companies that I walk into and I say, are your data science teams interacting on a daily basis with your IT and your data warehouse and BI teams? And the answer is no, but that causes more problems. We need to apply good governance and good controls. So ethical concerns mount as AI takes bigger decision-making role in more industries. This is from CIO magazine, right? So we don't know how programs are encoded or consciously or unconsciously and what kind of bias are going into these neural nets and algorithms. So what I'm telling you is part of our job is to deal with this second box here, dirty data. We need to understand what dirty data is. We need to get better at classifying it. We need to understand how to mark it, how to classify it, how to separate it, and how to hold business accountable for dirty data when it appears, how to get business to respond to fixing dirty data and bringing it back under master data. One of the other things that is concerning is real-time streaming. It is functionally critical, but it will cause more dirty data faster to enter our systems, especially if we don't govern it. So governance and governance controls are seriously fundamental to the process of building your correct analytics solution going forward. This is a big one. I don't think we can address it either here or anywhere else. Society currently has no consequences lined up for producers of dirty data. Now, what you can do as a practitioner in IT, especially if you follow the data vault methodology, is apply the standards and the rigor for exposure and transparency. You can create what we call a metrics vault or a dirty data dashboard and you can create metrics around dirty data that show the impact of dirty data on the company that you're dealing with today. So at least that's a starting point, and that's something that Data Vault methodology brings to the table. The other thing here, I said this a minute ago, collaboration with data scientists, absolutely necessary, but I feel like one of the things we don't do very well in analytics is help the data scientists govern. And we don't help them by interacting or collaborating enough. So absolutely. So one of the things that that I heard about is the intelligence community. Obviously, I do work with them. They have publicly recognized the fragility of AI algorithms based on dirty data. If you're interested in some of the YouTube presentations around this, then yeah, some of the dirty data providers have been banned from social media recently. Yes, that is a good thing. Finally, accountability, but we're not going to talk about that today. Apologize. But if you're interested in the Intel community's videos on this subject, please let us know. We'll get you some links. So my point is this: anytime we look at predictions, which we're going to do in just a second here, we need to keep in mind what the concerns are that go along with the predictive statements. Okay, so governance, accountability, standards, measurements, KPAs, KPIs, all things that come with the Data Vault mantra. So I'm going to sit here and say, okay, this is my opinion, just solely my opinion based on predictions. This is based on my reading and industry knowledge. So we're going to talk about 7 different predictions that I have for the industry in order to understand where Data Vault fits and what's happening with Data Vault or the future of Data Vault. You need to understand where the industry is going because the industry is guiding all of our innovation all the time. So prediction number 1 has to do with people. And if you know anything about Data Vault, then you know that we support or we enable through Data Vault people, process, and technology. We like to bring all 3 of those together. I think human engineering is not only critical, but will become more important as we move forward. Feedback loops, morals, ethics, the thinking, all the thinking aspects, the thought leaders, the thought groups, the think tanks, we need to return to some of those things, especially around AI, especially around collaboration. I think we've lost in the analytics community, we've sort of settled into our chairs, we've been assigned tasks, and we no longer say, hey, let's put a think tank together and try to imagine out of the box solutions that might help us with human engineering or with taking human engineering and embedding it into the systems that we build. But understanding of business operations, absolutely. The next prediction now, also remember, don't forget the title here. These are 5-year predictions. This isn't going to happen just this year. In some cases, parts of it will happen this year, parts of it will happen next year. It is my belief that this will take at least 5 years for it to mature and come to bear in the projects you're working on. The second prediction is also about people. I think collaboration is king. I think if you aren't collaborating, and not just within your group or within your local business users or your immediate sponsors, I think you need to collaborate with everyone in your company. I think you need to reach across country boundaries, reach across division boundaries, reach across geographical split teams. This is what I mean by collaboration. You want to be agile? Everyone in the company has to move to the same drum, has to move to the same standards. Absolutely important to think about it that way. So speaking the same language, using the same terminology, agreement on standard architectures and metadata, critical. The next prediction here is process. If you're talking about process, the last thing you want to do is be stuck with a mundane process that you do over and over and over again by hand. Who wants to write yet another stage load? I don't think anyone does. I don't think anyone on this call does. The point is, the more mundane process you get wrapped up into manually, the bigger the error percentage, the more likely you are to generate dirty data or break things or misalign things because you either get lazy or you just simply miss things as you go along. you forget what the actual process steps are. Automation for mundane tasks improves quality. Automation for assistance of repeatable tasks improves quality. So you absolutely need to engage in automation in some form going forward. If you're not already there, you're behind the eight ball. I think the next prediction here is process. You have to look at the way you build things. It's not just process of AI. Automation of AI will take shape, but the process of building your analytics platform, the process of interacting with your work and your work products and your family of work products, as well as the collaboration process. What do you do to solve a problem when it appears? How do you escalate? How do you mitigate? Do you offer mitigation strategies today when you suggest here's a problem? You really should be thinking as a practitioner, not only here's a problem, but here's a potential solution or set of solutions. Without the thought process around mitigation strategies, all you really are doing is being a squeaky wheel and complaining about things that are broken. You've got to sit down. As practitioners, you can improve your value to your company and to your boss and improve your outcomes by offering potential solutions to the problems that you see in the environment that you're working in. So process is absolutely critical. Automation of AI will take shape. I've talked about this a couple of years ago when I presented at WWDC about dynamic data warehousing and so on. But automation of AI will come in parts. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen in full. However, there is a company out there you should be aware of called DataRobot. And if you haven't looked at DataRobot, you probably should. They're making some waves and making some serious changes in the industry around how and where AI is applied. But make no mistake about it, DataRobot has all of the same concerns that I listed earlier. However, that said, where can we use neural nets, data science, learning algorithms today in the analytics process, in the data vault architecture, in the BI system, right? We can use it for data discovery, for classification of data, for assistance and guidance. I'm not saying replace the human. Please don't walk away with that statement. We do not replace the human. What the human is needed is for moral and ethical guidance and for training and retraining and correcting the AI's outcomes. Constant vigilance or governance is necessary in order to improve its data discovery and classifications. But this should happen, especially if you're pulling in external data sets. All right. So the next prediction here, prediction number 5, is around technology. Hybrid architectures will become the mainstream. They already are. And I don't just mean hybrid systems architectures. You're going to have some bits in the cloud, some bits on premise, but I also mean hybrid solutions and hybrid teams, hybrid designs and hybrid ways of working, hybrid possible designs for modeling. So there's going to be combinations of best of breed. For one particular business use case, you might use a graph model or a graph database to solve a problem. For another particular set of problems, you might use a columnar database. So there's lots of different things to think about when you're talking hybrid architectures, but prominent successes of solutions around the world. In terms of hybrid, you're also going to have to look at crossing borders and crossing boundaries with respect to country law. Of course, country laws will change what you are allowed to do and what you are allowed to share. But it certainly is something to consider. The next prediction here is a technology prediction. Privacy and security in the past, or at least for the past, I don't know, 15, 20 years, we have been told that if we want privacy and security enforced, that we should build it into the data model, we should build it into the processes, we should build it as architects, we should design it, and we should design methodologies and processes to handle it. Obviously, database engines like Oracle relational standard or traditional, and the SQL Server row-based and IBM's DB2 relational technologies, they have add-ons for security, but at what cost? They are limited and they decrease performance on average of 30%. And you don't want a system that does that just to pay the price of having security or encryption or encrypted data sets. You really can't afford it. We're now seeing new platforms and new technologies which embed privacy, embed security, and you use metadata markers. Metadata markers are the wave of the future in the automation tools and in the data management engines that allow the engines to protect data at rest, protect data in multiple facets and in multiple areas, as well as protect data from end to end. So the minute you connect from wherever you connect to, say you're at your home office, you connect to your company's server somewhere in the cloud, you don't want that data streaming in clear text over your network connection through a US company called Comcast, for example. So lots of different things are going on. But I think part of the future is you're going to see privacy and security layers built into hardware and software platforms that'll make it easier for us to manage. Now, the last prediction I have here for the market is technology. I really think this is a boundary that has been broken already. I think we're going to see more of it. It is an emerging market. You need to know what it is. You need to know how it works, and you need to be prepared to implement or architect and design solutions that use these features because your companies will survive on them, especially since COVID. And now we've gone to a lot of remote work and a lot of more emphasis on being in the cloud or being virtual as human resource talent. But technology, data sharing, BI as a service, platforms making it possible, we're finally there. I heard this story in 1998 as a vision. And I heard it again from a company that wanted, a consultancy that wanted to build it in 2003, but they couldn't do it. The technology wasn't there. But now the tech is here and it is fully capable, fully possible to realize data sharing and BI as a service. So I think you definitely will see that. Now, where does Data Vault fit? How does Data Vault fit? So let's take a look at Data Vault itself. For those of you who've been certified in class, forgive me, this is a reminder. For those of you who have never been to class, let me just tell you, Data Vault is a lot more than just the data model. Always has been, always will be. You see, I created the Data Vault model in the 90s, from 1990 to 2000, long before I met anyone else. And there are others that talk about Data Vault as if they created it, and they did not. But Data Vault is far more than a data model and always has been. These other folks, they tend to say, well, Data Vault's just a model. It's just a physical model of hubs, links, and satellites. And that's wrong. It's not. It's a methodology, it's an architecture, it's an implementation, it's a set of standards. Data Vault 2 is a solution for business intelligence. It encompasses everything from the way you work to the architectural designs you have, to the way you model your data, the way you set up your teams, to the way you execute Agile. So just a reminder there. So let's take a look at the 5-year predictions for the methodology. And by the way, we will have more writings and more blogs and more videos and more classes coming on how to implement the methodology properly. That is something that people are looking at, and we definitely want to improve it for you. So the Data Vault methodology will become more important. It's not going to go away. In fact, it's going to be central to the success in the ways of working in the BI industry. And if you don't know about Data Vault, hey, we're here, happy to talk to you, happy to help you understand. But the Data Vault methodology provides guidelines for successful implementations, standards for data classification, for governance, for ways of working, and of course, standards for automation, metadata, lineage. We define the governance processes and everything else that you need, including version control and collaboration across the workforce. So the methodology is a key component to what you do. The next prediction here that will change is the systems architecture. Notice I didn't just generally say architecture. There's all kinds of architecture, from data architecture to process to systems to on and on and on. But this is focused on systems architecture. Systems architecture is constantly evolving, especially with the changes that are made or the enablement that is provided by advancing solutions or advancing platforms. But one of the things that is critical. If you don't have it today on your source systems, you must have it tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I probably mean this year, is change data capture. The nature of pulling deltas off the source when they happen. So it's CDC is going to become required, because imagine this is the analogy here, folks. You have a Volkswagen Beetle that seats comfortably 6 adults, usually, or maybe comfortably 5 adults. Let's just say that. A Volkswagen Beetle Bug. And the last thing you would want is to stuff 20 people in the car and drive it down the freeway at 70 miles an hour or 120, 130 kilometers an hour. Forgive me, I don't know the translation to kilometers, but the whole idea there is that's not what you want. What you really want instead is a lot more transactions in a smaller vehicle. So you probably want 4 or 5 vehicles, and you want to spread the load of 20 people across 5 vehicles, all driving down the freeway at the same time in parallel. That's what you want. And that's the nature of changing your thought process from a batch orientation to a micro batch, mini batch, or even a real-time stream. But to get there, you don't want to process data every 5 seconds, reprocess data that's already been processed. You only want to pick up the changes. And that's where CDC comes in. That's where delta processing comes in. And people say to me, well, why don't we just take snapshots and dump it? Well, if you're going to introduce snapshots, you're going to introduce replicated data. If you introduce replicated data, that leads to bias in your algorithms. It means that the AI will favor a number because it sees the same data set 6 times. It says, you know what? I've seen it 6 times. That must mean it's pretty strong. So I'm going to bias towards that replication. You only want to store deltas if you're going to process it through these algorithms. So platforms get stronger. They can handle more virtualization. Now, I'm not saying you're going to virtualize all platforms across everything. What I'm saying is you're going to take virtualization and virtualization engines, and you're going to virtualize or apply it in specific components that fit. That's where it's going to be. You're going to see improved optimizers in platforms, and an example of that is the optimizers offered by Snowflake as well as Azure in the cloud, especially the big data edition. So these optimizers are going to get better and better and better and give you more performance improvements. And that's already happening. All right, so here's some 5-year predictions for systems architecture. You're going to see information marts being virtualized. And I just introduced this, but from a data vault perspective, what does that mean? Your information mart is basically anything that is put out to the business layer that has been munged through business rules, or what we call business rules. So some of that might be views in a database, if the database can handle it. Some of it might be through a virtualization engine or tool. Now, you don't want to rush out and buy a virtualization tool, although they're getting better, and some of them are really strong these days. And you definitely want to look into them, but they shouldn't be the only tool in your toolbox. So virtualization can mean a number of things, but the more you can virtualize, the basic rule of thumb is virtualize until performance dictates you must physicalize somewhere. And that means store in yet another table or make a copy of it. All right, so something to think about there. But you want to expand your agile capabilities, modernize your data infrastructure, and of course, automate analytic and data science processes. So the point here is not just for information marts and not just for virtualization. You might see bits of your staging area become virtual. You might see some portion of your raw data vault over the next 5 years become virtual. I don't think it's possible today or in the next 2 years to virtualize the entire raw data vault. But yeah, you can definitely virtualize the outgoing solutions or the BI facing systems, either through views or through a virtualization tool. So definitely capabilities exist out there. The last point here is that you've got to have training. Whatever tooling you have, whatever methodology you select, whatever process designs that you settle on, in order to be agile, in order to move things forward, you have to have common processes, common terminology, common methodology. That's where the data vault fits, right? It brings those things to the table, but then you need to be trained. It's not enough just to read the book and try it on your own. Although that's a good starting point, it doesn't get you to the end goal. And we can help you along the way. As long as you get the proper training, you should be in good stead. The other prediction here, people ask me about this all the time. What happens to the data vault physical model? Well, let me talk about the logical model first. The data vault logical model becomes critical if it isn't already. It's critical to the understanding of data. Remember, I started talking about concerns, and the concerns not just about AI, but where the platform's going. You have to be able to classify your data. By classify, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but you need to be able to say, this data belongs in this group, whether that group is bad data or good data to start with. And then inside of the good data, which business unit does this data apply to? Inside of the bad data, where is it coming from? What business unit does it apply to? What's its frequency, right, of being bad over time? But more importantly, these concepts have been around since the dawn of systems. This is not necessarily a data vault context, right? When you look at this, you have to know, even in operational systems, to build an operational system, you have to know what a business key is. If you don't, then you're not identifying or tying data back to the business. You have to know and understand how to apply context to those business keys, as well as the relationships across the business keys. These are three fundamental components that you must understand. So data vault logical modeling is absolutely important, even if you're doing it for an operational system. And yes, we've had a couple of operational data vaults built along the way, and they've been hugely successful. So the data vault logical model and conceptual model becomes absolutely critical to data understanding. Knowing what a business key is, knowing how to separate out descriptors, knowing how to parse out relationships that change over time, the nature of data and understanding. Included in this logical modeling exercise is not just data modeling, but the idea of taxonomies and ontologies. And to finish this out, at least for this slide, the keys to your success lie in the patterns and the consistency that the data vault methodology brings to the table. The data vault methodology gives you a working process with standards, terminology, common language, understandability, process mechanisms for identifying, classifying, and understanding data. Some of that could be automated and definitely needs to be automated. All right, so it is applied to understanding and mapping the data. I don't care whether it's data that's coming into your AI or analytics system or whether it's data on your source. You absolutely need to understand these critical pieces. So where does that leave us with the physical model? This is what everyone is dying to know, because I get asked this question all the time. Well, what about the data vault physical model? Do I have to stick with it? Should it be there? Should we use it? Is it going to survive the future? Here's the point. Data vault physical model adapts. Like every good modeling paradigm, the physical will separate in accordance with the platform capabilities. The physical models are not bound by logical constraints. The physical models must adapt to some degree to meet performance characteristics of the platform. So my point is this: we have for 2 years running now, we have a MongoDB data vault built in Mongo, and we worked with the MongoDB engineers to add some things. But anytime you build a data vault, we built the model logically, and then when we deployed it physically, we had to denormalize because MongoDB uses column families and denormalized structures. So that's not the case. In Snowflake, for example, we use JSON satellites. That's some physical model adaptations to leverage the capabilities that Snowflake bring to the table. Are we changing the data modeling paradigm? No, not at the logical level. Are we breaking standards? No, not at the logical level. But at the physical model, we adapt the model for platform capabilities. So the questions you need to be asking yourself as you go forward is what can be virtualized? What should be denormalized? And what's the impact to the performance of doing things to the data vault model? What's the impact of automation by changing the physical design, right? So another question here, what can be secured in place? Now there's a question here which I need to talk about, and data vault compatible with big data. I'm going to address that just briefly here before I finish up the solution. So I'm going to segue into that for just a minute, and I hope to finish in a few minutes to open it up for additional questions. Um, so data vault and big data. Big data is subjective. That's the first thing I want everyone to realize. If you've dealt with 10 terabytes, then 150 terabytes looks like big data to you. But the problem is, it's not just big data or the amount of data that you have. The formula for big data that causes problems is data in motion. How much data do you need to process in what time frame? So data, large sets of data in motion in a very short time frame create performance bottlenecks, create design challenges, create architectural constraints and platform constraints. Those are the things that you need to engineer for. Now, the beautiful thing about Data Vault is the modeling, the methods, the processes are designed based on set logic. And this is something you learn in certification class, CDVP2. So I'm not going to go too much further into this. But it's designed on set logic. And if you know anything about set logic math, you know it's infinitely scalable both ways, to the tiniest of minutia and the largest of large. So as long as you can couch something in a set logic mathematical context, in other words, a process design, then you can scale that process design if the hardware or the software allows it. So we pick up automated scaling capabilities, automated performance capabilities of the platform when the standards are applied properly. But that's only one piece of big data. That addresses the volume over time. I'm going to address one other thing here in terms of big data. And this is often not discussed. I wanted to bring it up anyway. And it's the nature of textual data, video, audio, and images. If you're dealing with text data, you have to go through pre-processing. If you're dealing with audio, images, and video, you have to go through a pre-processor. The data itself is unusable except by a human. It's human consumable. If you listen to an audio file, you can determine using your head what's in there. The images, if a human looks at an image, they can tell you what's in there, what's not in there, what the colors are. They categorize and group things. But if you load an image to a database, what good is it going to do you if the database doesn't have image parsing or image comprehension capabilities? That's right, comprehension, understanding, AI, right? So pre-processing or pre-parsing is important. What we care about in Data Vault is after you parse it, after you process it, you pull the metadata from it. Now what we care about is structuring that metadata so that it links back to those objects in the big data world, so that when you can run analytic queries on the metadata, this image contained 3 rocks, one of this size, one of that size, and one of that size. This image contained, this video contained these 3 people, and we've identified these people as this person, that person, that person, right? And we need to track them, and they're headed all in the same direction, or they're walking away from each other. All that kind of metadata is what pre-processing gives you, all right? So something to think about. Now, that's just a little brief glimpse into what we mean by handling big data with Data Vault. The Data Vault methodology helps you process and decide where in the architecture to do these things. Those are the standards from the methodology. The Data Vault model helps you integrate the results of that process for big data. And one of the questions is, how do you put a business key on an image? How do you put a business key on a document? Are there multiple business keys in a document? The answer to that one is yes, most of the time. So there are also multiple keys most of the time in video, in audio, and in images as well. So lots of different processing characteristics. So that's sort of discussion around big data. All right, so let's move along so we can open it up for additional questions. So some things to think about when it comes to Data Vault. The methodology is critical for the ongoing success, not just automation, but dealing with your systems and your solution. Automation itself relies on standards, patterns, and repeatable best practices. It does you no good to say, well, I like Data Vault, but I'm only going to use this piece and not that piece. I like the concepts of Data Vault, but I'm not going to adhere to the standards. If you do that, you might as well not purchase an automation tool because you can't implement that way. If you break the standards, you're going to suffer the consequences. Your solution will not scale, I guarantee it. And this is something that we teach in the class. The importance of data vault modeling is a split value. So again, it's not just the raw vault model or the physical model. It's not black and white. You know, I have to use all of the physical model in order for this to be a data vault. That's not what I've said. I said logical modeling, taxonomies, and ontologies are important, but there's a split business value to the approach to modeling. So something to think about. Systems architecture will change based on platform capabilities. However, remember, going back to the previous modeling comments, I am not standing here telling you that it's okay to break the physical data modeling standards for Data Vault. That's not what I said. So please don't take that away from this discussion. It is still not okay to break the physical modeling standards. There are different, just simply different ways of representing the physical model in order to take advantage of the platform characteristics. All right, and that changes with the platform. So to finish this up, corporate culture has to transform. You have to think about collaborative paradigms, how you're going to work with different environments, different teams, different cultures around the world. You can no longer just simply say, I'm going to do this data vault thing in my local team and we're going to be successful. You can, but you're going to recreate stovepipe solutions, and that's not what you want. So to finish this out, Data Vault 2 is the enabler. This is the whole point. DV2 brings with it all the methods, the procedures, the processes, the prescriptive side of how you build. And it talks about how to turn that into a success for being agile, scalable, consistent, and producing a higher quality result. Now we're going to open it up for questions, but before I do, just really quickly, we offer, as Data Vault Alliance, we offer Kickstart packages, we offer coaching and mentoring, reviews and assessments. One of the things we do not offer is full consulting services. If you want those, reach out to any one of our authorized training partners. And I've got a coupon down below. Those of you that have an expired account on Data Vault Alliance can use the coupon. Those of you that do not yet have an account that want one can apply this coupon to a yearly membership fee, which is currently $79 a year US. So you can apply this coupon before January 31st. Thank you very much. So let's go ahead and take up questions. Neil, do you have some?
If I read out, Dan, you can answer. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it'd be easier to let you think about the answer here. So go right up to the top. One question we have is, do you know any method other than Data Vault that can do both ELT and streaming feeds at the same time?
Hey, Dakota?
I'm sorry, any other method other than—
Wait a second. Let me mute the line.
Please. Thank you. All right, sorry, Dan, back to you.
Please repeat the question.
Do you know of any other method apart from Data Vault that allowed you to do streaming and batch feed?
That's a good question. I am not familiar with another approach that allows both at the same time using the same process design, okay? There are some other architectural designs, one of them called Lambda, but it splits streaming from batch, if I understand that properly. I may have that wrong. I haven't studied it extensively. But I do not know of any other methodology or standard design process that uses the exact same process design to achieve both.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. I think Lambda does that. It has two calculation paths for fast and slow time response. So no other method I'm aware of does the same thing, Dan. Okay. What's the recommended Data Vault automation approach and tool? I think this one's difficult.
Data Vault automation approach and tool. I'm going to say I work with about 4 or 5 different vendors today. They're all working very hard and diligently to bring together quality automation Data Vault 2. Excuse me. I do not have a single recommended vendor. You have to weigh it based on your pros and cons and your objectives or your requirements. I will say that Warescape is there, and I really do like the Data Vault Express from Warescape. I will also say there is a large, from what I understand, a large learning curve with it, but with some proper coaching and training, you can overcome that fairly quickly. There is a Vault Speed out of Europe, and it's a fairly good tool, very strong showing in support of Data Vault 2.0. And then there is Irwin has, the company Irwin has a tool. They used to call it Irwin Edge. They used to call it Mapping Manager. I don't know what they call it today, but there is one there. And it's all right. I don't know. I haven't looked at it in a year, so I cannot speak to its latest innovations, but I know they've been hard at work trying to support Data Vault 2. And there's a couple other vendors. Well, of course, yours, Neil, DBT, which is geared as a consultant's tool and a programmatic tool, which is really, really good. There is a new one, which I really like, called Ellie, E-L-L-I-E, out of Finland, which addresses the business analyst aspect of automation and mapping metadata at a business level. It's really quite phenomenal. Also, as I understand it, it generates patterns for Warescape to ingest. So some pretty cool stuff. And I think they're in talks with Vault Speed at the moment, but I'm not familiar with that. There's a couple of other vendors out there. And to be honest, I have not spoken to them in the last 2.5 years. So I do not know where their tool is at or the quality that their tool brings. Hopefully that answers the question.
I mean, the Irwin tool's called the Data Intelligence Suite, and it's the Data Vault Smart Connector aspect of that works there.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, but we also see the same tools coming up, and you're right, they are very different, and you should choose one based on your particular use case that you have. Okay, so what's your thoughts on data catalogs, and how does that align with Data Vault 2?
Okay, data catalogs are important as part of the metadata and the governance. I think along with that comes version control. I think you need version control in order to maintain auditability. And I don't just mean version control over metadata. I mean version control over the process designs, the table structures, if you use them, the source and the target and the connection, the date and the time. Everything you do has to be version controlled, or should be, in order to prove auditability from start to finish, in order to show lineage at a particular point in time. So the other thing there about lineage metadata and data catalog, you need one. The question is where and how. Some of the virtualization tools have some really strong entries in metadata governance controls, version controls, collection, collaboration, and usage for building those metadata catalogs. There are some big heavyweight horses or software vendors out there that have catalogs, like IBM Information Catalog, for example, and I think I got the name wrong. But there are some heavyweight horses out there that have been around a long time. They're very mature, and if used in the right way, then they can be very, very successful. However, I prefer, now this is my opinion only, I prefer a tool where the metadata catalog is directly linked into the BI solution or available through an API to the BI tooling. I think that's absolutely pertinent. I think the metadata should be interactive, and when it's changed once in one place, it should propagate out, including to the automation tools underneath as well. So that's just my feeling. Some of that's available today, and some of that requires a bit of hand work or coding to build.
Great, thank you. On quality criteria, so do you see a possibility of automated sanity checks being put in place to run on top of a data vault to identify completeness gaps and anomalies?
Great question. The short answer is yes. A slightly longer answer is, what took you so long? You should have been doing this for the last 10 years. And I don't mean that as a joke. Honestly, the part of the problem is I haven't had time to write about how you should do it, or when, or where, or the approach for it. The good news is that's one of the things that Data Vault Alliance is planning for a course, is a 2-day QA QC course for how to implement quality controls and quality aspects on an automated basis. The shorter answer there is, if you don't have someone on staff in your analytics team with hardcore QA experience, or that has gone to school for it, then you need to find that person. You need to hire them and put them on your team, because QA QC is vital. They are the gatekeepers to accountability for development efforts, and it has to be set up that way. Now, it does you no good to bring in a QA QC resource, design all your QA and QC, even in an automated fashion, if your developers don't pay attention to it, or your developers are not held accountable. By that, I mean political power must be given to the QA QC line of defense, so that they can say, look, you didn't follow the standards, and kick it back to development and not check it into production. Development, as long as developers have access to check things into production, your QA QC is a failed attempt from day one. So if you're going to go around QA QC, don't even bother. You're going to build a failure.
Yeah, so Dan, you're really talking about there is implementing what we're now calling a true data ops process.
Yep.
On that, with the feedback loops and approvals, and really, to me, it's the next level of Agile, applying DevOps to data and what we do in data. So have the automated regression testing in there, have the success failure criteria documented, and have the pipeline set up so that if certain tests fail, then that's not allowed to be moved to production, and it has to go back to the developers.
Yeah, governance becomes paramount. Developers must pay attention to it and abide by whatever the ruling is from QA QC outcomes. And the political powers, the executives in the House, must absolutely grant the power to QA QC, and QA QC, what they say goes. It's final. Now, if you ask me, are there any companies successful with this today? I'm going to tell you yes, hundreds. But I can name one specific example in the public who has presented at my conference 2 or 3 years running. That would be WWDVC in the US. Intact Financial has recorded a couple of videos, and over the last 7 years or 8 years I've been working with them, they built a full QA QC based on teachings and trainings that I've helped them with from the beginning. They built a few full QA QC, and they've automated pretty close to 80% of that. Along the way, they have 2 people in their QA QC for over 500 folks in their IT environment. So it's very successful, and you can do it. You just need to, again, stick to the standards. But first, you need to learn what those standards are.
Okay. Could you expand a bit more on the idea of having JSON within satellites?
Absolutely. JSON in satellites is really, really cool. That's the technical geeky speak for it. But JSON in satellites, first off, you need a platform that performs. It does you no good to stick JSON or XML in a satellite. It's basically a variant data type column in your table, so to speak. And it does you no good if your platform doesn't perform, or if your platform forces you every time there's a structural change to recode the views or the SQL against it. That's re-engineering that you don't want to pay the price of. So if you pass the first check mark, which is, can the platform do it? The second check mark is, can the platform do it efficiently? And the third check mark is, can the platform do it efficiently over volume? Then you're safe to go ahead and implement. Now, in the case of Snowflake, which I'll speak to because I'm familiar with that engine, you can simply declare a variant type, and there's a bit more to it than that, but that's the basic starting point. And Kent, correct me if I'm wrong, if I get any of this wrong, please. But you can create the variant data type. The beauty of it in Snowflake is that it will go through and parse the metadata out of the JSON structure in order for the optimizer to know where the data elements actually live, so that when the SQL gets there, it doesn't have to think about how do I parse the text. It goes straight to the data element and pulls it out when you need it, when you ask for it. And of course, there are functions around parsing lists and so on. There are some best practices for extreme volume cases to help performance continue to be improved. And one of the best practices there is when you reach somewhere around 500 billion, that's billion with a B, rows in your table, or maybe 430 billion rows in a single table that are all JSON derivatives, then you probably want, if your performance starts to die off, which at a seriously upper limit it might, although they just improved the performance optimizers with, I think it was a 60% gain public, or 45% gain number. I forget what I read, but somewhere in that range. But in that case, what happens is you want to take the columns that you're interested in having additional performance and you normalize them. So you leave the JSON in the satellite it is in, but you create another satellite with just the columns that need more performance over higher volumes. And then you reference those first for the more common queries. But JSONs and satellites are really easy. The beautiful thing about Snowflake from that perspective, if you have a record that comes in and they've changed the JSON structure on you, it simply loads and your queries do not break downstream. It gives you time to adapt your queries and your systems to ingest or use the new data set that's embedded in the JSON. So without ever re-engineering the satellite structure. So it's pretty cool from that regard. Now, one last bit about Snowflake. If you're processing XML as an incoming stream, don't. Stop. Stop processing XML. Change it to JSON and ingest it as JSON in Snowflake and be done with it.
Good. Will you be running the conference this year in May?
Yes, however, we made the decision yesterday that it will be virtual. We have not updated the website or the event registration yet, given that I had to prepare for this presentation. That will happen either today or tomorrow or early next week. We will begin mailing everyone to let them know. So we have to speak to all our speakers. We have to speak to our sponsors, but we will be 100% virtual in May. It will be those same dates. And due to COVID, that's the way it's going to be. So we'll have more information on that soon.
Okay, I'm going to try and paraphrase a rather long question here. So I think it's saying that if we're using Data Vault to do some early prototyping or exploration of requirements, and we've kind of ended up with a little bit of a bottom-up Data Vault model, how can we rescue ourselves from that situation and get across to having a business vault in place?
All right. Well, the cheeky answer is very carefully, but there's a bit of truth to the cheeky answer. You want to do it in increments. The Data Vault is built to be modular. Don't boil the ocean. Don't go in and re-engineer everything from the ground up and say we failed miserably. Take one pit at a time. Bite off a sprint. Try to knock it down to a 2-day sprint or a 3-day sprint where you're re-engineering one portion. And when I say 2 or 3 day sprint, I mean in development only. And that excludes, profiling. So if you know your data set and you know that you want to integrate it, the key is in the slides in the presentation I gave today, and that's the business keys. Understanding of business keys, taxonomies, and ontologies, and how the data set works together is absolutely critical. Now, for those of you that are certified in Data Vault 2, you probably remember the discussion vaguely in class because we did talk about it, especially if you took the course from me. But it wasn't until last month that we actually had visual slides to go along with that discussion. So we are now teaching that in the certification class on how to do that. But there's a bit of coaching. So if you're interested in some coaching along how to make that happen, please contact us. We're happy to help you.
Right, sorry, I had to put my mute on there because of car noise in the background. I think finally on here, do we have any example implementations for real-time scenarios or a reference?
Oh, yes. Picture? Yes, real-time implementations are all over the world today. I could ask Kent Graziano, who's on the call. He works for Snowflake. For those of you that don't know, I could ask him to talk about them, but I'm going to talk about one particular customer who is in the public, who did present at my conference 2 years running. This company is called Micron. Micron is one of the world's largest commercial, non-government entities. There are larger entities inside government with bigger data sets and bigger problems running data faster. Now, Micron's numbers, this was 2 years ago. These are Micron's numbers from 2 years ago. Micron is ingesting 2.2 billion records every 60 minutes. As I understand it, it's either 10 parallel, no, it's 100 parallel feeds. That was 2 years ago. 100 parallel feeds, 2.2 billion records into the raw vault. And they are on Snowflake. They just completed their transition from Teradata to Snowflake last year or the year before, just before the year end, I think it was last year. But anyway, they completed their transition and they're streaming from 10 worldwide manufacturing facilities into their vault. All of these records, these are machine generated data sets, most of them. They're also pulling from, I think, SAP for HR and product configurations, and they're pulling from Salesforce for sales records, which is pales in comparison. Their average table size in the raw vault 2 years ago was 360 billion records in each raw vault structure. So people tell me, well, Data Vault has too many joins and it doesn't perform. I got to beg to differ because Micron is getting sub-second query response times. They were on Teradata, now they're getting faster response times on Snowflake with that level of volume and that level of inflow. So people tell me all the time, well, Data Vault doesn't scale to quote big data. In fact, that came up. It wasn't posed that way, but the question was posed, how does it work with big data? And here you have a very large scale of data processing extreme amounts of data in real time directly into the Data Vault and all the way out to the BI tool. So there you have it. Hopefully those numbers make sense to people.
Great. I think that's it in terms of questions. So I think we're already an hour and a quarter in, which is a good time. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. It's been